Hello, everybody. Welcome to Just Talk Live. And I will admit, it's very weird for it just to be me on this screen. As you can see, my co host, Destiny, is not here with us this evening. She had some other prior things that she needed to do. And so Destiny has the evening off, and it's just me. But before we welcome our amazing guests for this Queering the Family episode of Just Talk Live, I do want to kind of talk about what Queering the Family is. So I'm going to share the screen and to show you just a little graphic about Queering the Family. And Queering the Family is a series where Unbound, which this is Unbound produces this show in partnership with the AF program, but Unbound is also partnering with More Light Presbyterians. And if you don't know what More Light Presbyterians are, you should look it up at mlp.org. But it is an amazing organization that it focuses on inclusion and affirming the queer community within the Presbyterian Church, and partners with churches on how to do that well and how to be a welcoming community to our queer siblings out there. And so we have partnered together to do a publication called Queering the Family, in which we do just that. Queering really means to kind of disrupt or open up or expand or disrupt what it means to us when we think about family. And this series is being published between Mother's Day and Father's Day. And the reason why we did that is to not really dismiss our moms and dads, but to expand what it means to be a parent or to be a part of a family, a chosen family, as many of us in the queer community have. And so we are focusing on that and how faith intersects what that means. And so if you want to check out the series, you can go to justiceunbound.org /queering the family with the link right there to get all of those articles that are coming out. And we publish them weekly. So twice a week, we have writers come on to write about the family, and we focus on themes. So just check it out. And each week has a different theme. So with that, I'm going to remove this, and we're going to welcome our wonderful guests who are also writers on the Queering the Family series. And so we'll be welcoming Valerie Izumi and Brett Webb-Mitchell and Ashley DeTar Birt. We are so grateful that y'all are with us. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And so just to get us started, let's just introduce ourselves and where you are, maybe what you do, anything you want to offer up. And we'll go clockwise. So we'll start with Valerie. Clockwise on my screen. So we'll start with Valerie, Brett, and then Ashley.
Hey, I'm Valerie Izumi, and I'm a queer woman of color, Black and Japanese. I am originally from New York and still consider myself a New Yorker, but I'm living in Louisville, Kentucky, where I work for the denominational offices for the Presbyterian Church in the Office of the General Assembly, coordinating the General Assembly nominations process. I am partnered with my wife, who is significantly younger than I am. So we're intergenerational, interracial couple. And I also identify as a woman who lives with a disability. So I think I check all the boxes. Glad to be here.
And Brett?
Hey, I'm Brett Webb-Mitchell. I've been ordained for almost 38 years. So I have been a part of a denomination that started off as the United Presbyterian Church in the last few decades before that, and witnessed the reunion in 1983. I wrote a book in 2007, 2008 called "I'm Being a Gay Parent." And it was following my time of teaching at Duke Divinity School, I was outed and denied tenure because I'm gay. So I decided to write a book about it and coming out. And you can imagine in 2008, we still weren't a denomination that was welcoming of LGBTQ people. So at the Presbyterian meeting, which charges were to be leveled against me, we voted on 10A. And that was the amendment that changed our book of order and that stopped the charges against me cold. So I have been celebrating our 10-year anniversary of that move. Currently, I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm the father of 2 amazing adult children, one who has also gifted us with a granddaughter. They live in Asheville, and my son lives in London. My partner and I have been together 3 years, and we are planning our wedding for next year in Portland, Oregon, in the shadow of Mount Hood.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's great. And Ashley?
Wow, congratulations, Brett.
Thanks.
Hi there. I am Ashley DeTar Birt, pronoun she, hers. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I currently live in sort of the Bronx, New York. Ask me later why it's a sort of. I
know the answer.
You have heard, yeah, you know. I am ordained as a pastor in the Presbyterian Church. I currently serve as the program coordinator for Beloved Arise, which is an LGBTQ Christian youth organization. And I have been ordained now for, I think, just over 3 years, but I've been doing ministry in the church for over a dozen at this point, primarily with a focus on children, youth, and families, as well as a focus on sort of social justice things like racial justice, LGBTQ issues, things of that nature. I am Black, I am bisexual, I am a cisgender woman, and I am married to another woman. I am in an interracial relationship. I am in a relationship with another pastor who is, my wife is Unitarian Universalist, and we love her anyway. And she is aware that I make that joke.
Sharing that love with our UU siblings. Yeah. Well, welcome all of you, and thank y'all so much for being with us. And thank you for writing with for Unbound and More Light for the Queering the Family series, and it's great being a witness to y'all. But I think one of the things that I have been asked the most, and a lot of the queer things that Unbound has done, is that why do I use the word queer? And that word has had a lot of meaning for people, and I think that's many times it can be generational, but it has been used toward me as a derogatory term. But what does that word queer mean to you, which may help a lot of people who have been asking that question? And we'll just start with the same order. So Valerie, what does queer mean to you?
Well, generally speaking, queer means that I'm different. I stand outside of the circle that proclaims itself normative. So I stand outside of that circle, and there is not a straight or even boundary around me and those who I claim to be family and community. I use queer because that is exactly how I identify. I don't think of myself as a lesbian. Just when I think of that word, that doesn't really express to me who I am. My wife is genderqueer, and I will always be attached to her. But if I would not be, and I have been married to a man before, but I would not be with a man ever again. But I just, that describes me queer, not lesbian.
So for the last 3 years, I was the LGBTQIA plus advocate coordinator for the Oregon, Idaho United Methodist Churches in Oregon and Southern Idaho. And I used the term queer, both in referring to myself, but also theology, biblical studies, and the movement as queer. And sometimes I did it because in some of these small little churches in Oregon and Idaho, I have to admit I did it for the shock value, to wake people up, to share with them how we have taken a term that, as you were saying, Lee, has been used against me, against probably all of us, in a derogatory manner, and we claim it. We own it. We are reframing it. We are reliving it. We are rebranding it. And I think that that's a positive, much like the pink triangle from Nazi Germany. I think we are writing a new narrative. We are writing a new story. And I think we have the audacious right to go ahead and use it in ways that are helpful and not hurtful, that are healing, because there's enough abuse that's gone on in all of our lives, the four of us here gathered to get together, in terms of how society and the church and its part in it have sown homophobia within us. I, like Valerie, was married to a woman for 20 years. And when I came out, I think I was floundering for labels and terms. I refer to myself as a gay man or queer. So I use both.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to go into it, I have like sort of 3 different reasons. One is because I'm not straight. And like I said before, I do identify as bisexual, and like we can go into that. And sometimes I don't want to, and I don't owe that to anyone. Mm-hmm. And so I can say I'm queer, and that tells you everything that you need to know.
Right.
And if you want to know more, you can get to know me. But otherwise, like, no, I don't owe you anything. Unless like I decide that I want to give you that. So that's sort of one part of it. The second part is that I feel like it ties me to other folks within the community, because it is used as such an umbrella term that it connects me to people who I feel like a lot of times they try to divide us from. There are gay folks, there are lesbians, there are bi folks, there are trans folks, there are all of these different parts of the community. And in a lot of ways, like, we try to segregate ourselves, or folks will try to segregate us and try to pit us against each other and try to point out all the ways that we are different. And I like queer because it covers a myriad of things, and it reminds us of the things that we have in common as opposed to the things that we don't. And it actually does feel to me like a term that can be used and reclaimed in this way of community. And then the third reason that I like using it, I remember back when I used to work at a church, I had a conversation with a gentleman who actually was at the Stonewall riots, and he and I were sort of going back and forth, and he didn't particularly like the use of the word, and that's fine. Not everyone does, and to each their own. But the one thing that I did push back on, because he tried to sort of make it generational and say, like, well, you're a younger generation, you're not used to that. It's like, first of all, like, we get called names all the time. Like, I live in New York, and I've been called names, like, on the subway. But also, like, hold on. Wasn't it your generation marching in the streets with the "We're here, we're queer, get used to it" signs? Like, weren't you all the ones who were out there, like, pushing and being extraordinarily radical and political with this? And so, like, when I think of this word that has been reclaimed and used as this tool of political and radical reclamation, like, I feel connected to my queer and trans ancestors before me, and I feel connected to that movement, and it reminds me what I'm a part of and what I need to keep fighting for, because, like, we're heading towards the promised land, but we're not there yet. And so the combination of all those things is what really connects me to that word.
Yeah, I've had so many conversations, and it has been kind of that generational, that rhetoric saying like that's why, and I always use the example in my life of being called queer as a $2 bill, and if you're from the South, that was something that was said a lot, or queer as a picnic basket or something like that. But the $2 bill was always like the thing, and I remember learning about, and I still have a $2 bill that I hold to remind myself that of that queerness, that $2 bills are disruptive because they're not based on a unit that is like, it's not based on the regular units that we use in our currency. Like it's not a factor of 5. They are they're very disruptive, and they're very out of the box. And so I always use that as an analogy. But I have gotten a lot of pushback from a lot of people in a different generation than necessarily me, that have had a lot of problems with that word. And a lot of that stems from family. And a lot of that stems from, just people in society. And so I wonder how this how that, and how our queerness in this space kind of intersect with family as we're thinking about our own queerness, and then what that means when we all have biological families, but then there's history there, some good, some bad. But then in the queer community, there's this thing called chosen family, which not a lot of people maybe in a broader sense know about. So how does queerness intersect with family, Valerie, for you?
Before I answer that, Lee, I want to say that I find that a lot of straight people are the ones who have a problem with my using the term queer. And I actually got in an argument. Well, it was a one-sided argument because the women were arguing with me, and I was just answering them. Just absolutely offended that I used the word queer, and said, "Well, why are you using that word?" And I said, "Because that's how I identify." And they were like, "Well, why don't you say lesbian?" And I said, "Because I don't identify that way." "Well, why don't you use the word gay?" "Because I don't identify, don't name me." But they really had trouble with it. And it really was, I could tell from what they were saying that they weren't coming from a place of hatred, but, and they were Black women. They came from a place of wanting to protect me from the world outside. And it took a lot for me to convince them that this is okay. It's okay now. We can say that. So, so how does queerness intersect with family? I do think that there are some members of my family, my biological family, and perhaps even the family I married into, who might wonder why we use that word. But I think Midwestern sensibilities, they won't ask. They don't ask, like, why do you use that word? But our families all around 100% accept us, and so it's fabulous. So it doesn't matter what we're using. My chosen family, my queer family, yeah, I feel actually pretty special. I feel like a very special person, in that my other queer siblings and LGBTQIA plus siblings welcome me with an embrace that's unbelievable, because I, like Brett, was married for a very, 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 very long time to a member of a different gender, a man. And they immediately just wrapped me up. Some of them were like, "Yeah, we knew. We knew before you knew." But just the wrapping me upness. And I really do believe that using the nomenclature queer helps in that, because I think of myself as different, that word makes me different. It helps me receive that embrace in a way that I might not have. I never felt isolated when I came out. So I'm grateful. I know that I'm lucky, and I know that's not everyone's experience.
Brett, how have you seen queerness intersect with family?
Right. I'm going to give an answer that's going to kind of cover the rest of what I'm going to say today. The first 3 books, as well as I was part of AC Swap in writing a policy on people with disabilities in the church. My first 3 books were on people with disabilities living in the church, and came out of my experience as a music therapist with kids with disability. I worked primarily with kids with autism, on the autism spectrum, as we would say today. And one of my dearest friends, who did go to Duke Divinity School while I was teaching there, had a child who was labeled autistic. And I remember one of the things, his name was Buck Cochran. One of the things that Buck said to me early on in our friendship was that his son, who was born and is autistic, his son saved him from the tyranny of the American family.
Wow.
That his son, because he's autistic, saved him from the tyranny of the American family. And that phrase and that way of being in the world really has also transferred to my coming out, my being the father, a gay dad, a gay parent, a queer parent. It works in what we're talking about as well today. A lot of my work with kids with disabilities, I also worked with a lot of parents, and one of the things we had to do was we had to honor and recognize the death of the Gerber baby, the perfect baby. So one of the things that queer and queering and queerness has helped me to do is realize that I am freed up from the tyranny of the American family. And the tyranny of the American family is that it was, especially up through the 1970s, the nuclear family. It was mom, a dad, 2 kids, preferably a boy and a girl, gender specific, plus a dog, a cat, a mortgage, at least 2 cars, and living in the suburbs. We looked to Donna Reed. We looked to Father Knows Best. Later, we looked to George Jetson and the Flintstones. Later on was Bart Simpson and the like. But we looked towards those images as being us and what we were to aspire towards. So as I grew up, having been born in the 50s and raised in the 60s and 70s, I think that queerness and coming out and being a gay dad, with my former partner, we raised, along with their mom, we raised 3 parents, 3 adults raised my children in Chapel Hill, Carborough, North Carolina. We decided at that time, and this is where the queerness helps, was we are going to write our own story. We don't have to follow anyone else's story. We get to write the next story for the next generation. And that's what people have been waiting for. And this is part of my work, is to make it possible for the next generation not having to go through a lot of the stuff we had to go through, in recognizing that we are part of a family of choice, that yes, 3 adults can raise, 4 adults, 5 adults. It takes a community to raise kids anyway, let alone for kids to raise parents. So I really, again, and I'll keep on going back to this, queerness liberated me from the tyranny of the heterosexual, white, cisgender, middle class family, nuclear family idol that I think is still out there and still operating quite well and quite healthily. Unfortunately, even when I hear from administrators in Washington, D.C., as liberated as I would like to think that they are, it still goes back to a certain kind of white, middle-class, cisgender, heterosexual model of doing parenting and being a family. And so I think that queerness gives us freedom from that tyranny, and I find it is tyrannical.
Ashley, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so I grew up as an only child, and also for most of my life, starting when I was about 8 years old or so, I grew up as the only Black family on my street in a neighborhood that was fairly diverse, but also the neighborhood itself was sort of a little bit split up. Financially, the further north in the neighborhood you got, the more financially well-off folks were, and also the whiter it got. And so we were a little bit further off, not quite where like all the mansions and stuff were, but in the part where it had gotten pretty white. And so like I was already sort of isolated and different, and also had grown up as like a tomboy and all these things. And so I was already just kind of different and kind of used to doing things by myself. So I was kind of used to keeping to myself in a lot of ways. And I remember throughout like high school and the beginning of college, complaining about all the boys that I had crushes on, not having crushes on me back, and all the frustration with that. And my mom just kind of looked at me and was like, so are you gay now? Or like, what does this mean? And that was the most offensive thing that she could have possibly said, because were you not listening to me? I am so upset about these things. How could you possibly come to that conclusion? And then in college, when I realized that I had to come out, and then realized I had to come to her, and it's like, oh no, she's gonna bring this up. And the day after my 21st birthday, because I decided I was dating someone at that time secretly, and it was my first girlfriend, I decided I had to be an adult now. And so I went to the liquor store for the first time and bought like many bottles of her favorite wine to give to her in case it went poorly. And then came home, I drove her car and came out to my mother. And she took it fine-ish. Like, it was clearly not her favorite thing, and I got the "you're too pretty to have a girlfriend" stuff and all that things. And also she was like, I still love you, you didn't have to bribe me. And then she did bring up just like, so I was right, and was like, you were half right, shut up. And then like later on I came out to my father, and that was a far too embarrassing story for me to say on camera. But I was used to sort of keeping things to myself. And so I told them, and then like no one else in my family. And I just sort of lived and figured like, well, it's not really going to come up. Like, it doesn't really matter. So it's fine. Like, they're never really going to ask questions. They're never really going to know. So why do I have to tell them? And it was really tricky, because there were times where I had to listen to people say things that were hurtful and just sort of take it. At one point, I had a relative who was just saying really offensive things, and I finally snapped and just like yelled about it, but never. I came from it sort of as like a political argument as opposed to a personal one, and then just sort of stormed off eventually. And I just didn't know what to do, but also like I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know, good or bad, what was going to happen. So I kind of figured like, you know what, it's fine. It's not a big deal. And then I met my wife, and we started dating, and that was great. And I realized at some point that like she was going to stick around, and I had to figure out like, what does that mean? And at some point, like, I don't even remember how long we had been together at that point, but like I was on the phone with my grandmother, and it'd been at least a year or so, and I was just like, why not? And I told my grandmother, and I've no earthly idea what possessed me to do this, but I told her, and it was fine. Like, she was okay. And in hindsight, like, your granddaughter's in her 20s and has literally never talked about dating anyone. Like, she might have figured this out. But it was fine. And then for most of the rest of my family, I got engaged. And that's how they found out. And it was fine. It was fine. Like, they came to the wedding. They were happy. The cousin that I had previously gotten in this huge fight with planned my wedding reception. I have no idea what transformation happened, or who talked to her, or what changed in those years, but something changed. And I I don't know exactly what was going on or what has happened. What I do know is that there was this idea that my life was supposed to go one way. And even though I didn't personally believe in that, it had been so deeply ingrained in me. And there were already so many things about me that didn't fit the norm that I had internalized this thing that, like, this was a step too far. And because it was a step too far, I was scared of what was going to happen. And so I couldn't talk about it. And then when I finally didn't have a choice anymore, and I just had to say, like, screw it, because, like, what am I going to do? Not invite my entire family to my wedding? Like, then I'm just going to have a wedding full of white people. That's not acceptable. Someone has to dance. And it turned out, be it because they are accepting of queerness or they are accepting of me, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it was enough. And I am enough. And so I'm not scared of that anymore. And I'm just sort of like amazed that for me at this point, family can equal sort of a letting go of fear. That I don't have to be afraid of them or myself.
Yeah. And that goes against, like, you know, what Brett was saying about this new, like the tyranny of the American family. And I wonder if we can talk about that a little bit, because I do think, talk about that a little bit more, because I do think this idea of family and kind of a heteronormative, like white idea of family has had, we had a training or something. We had a training at the center, and somebody put in family as one of the pillars of, like, the perpetuation of white supremacy. And I haven't seen that before with kind of like anti-racism training before. Like, family was put in there as like a pillar of perpetuating these systems. And I think it's like this American, like, traditional family. So I wonder if we could talk about that a little bit, because it seems like I had the fear that I had, and the fear, Ashley, you just expressed, that stems from that. And, like, family has had more power than I feel like a lot of people have really talked about. Valerie, what do you think about that? Uh-oh, mute. I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Although I did recognize what Brett was talking about, I had the complete opposite. I did not have the tyranny of the American family. I had as you know, I'm half Black, half Japanese, and my Black father was a soldier, and we lived in Germany when I was very little. And when I was 5 years old, he committed suicide. And so we came back to the States, and here's my mother, who didn't speak much English, and had Japanese was her language. She had 2 little girls. I was 5, my sister was 4, and we moved to the projects in Brooklyn, in Coney Island. So we were, I guess, in essence, freaks to most of the people. They were these little mixed children who had no father because he killed himself. And I lived in a very abusive household, and I ran away from home when I was 16 and went to live with nuns. So I did not have that family. So I built that family for myself when I got married and I had my children, and everything was nice. So, we had reading time. We had the kids in the neighborhood like to come to our house because it was so quiet and everybody was nice to one another. But at some point in your life, you have to be honest with yourself, right? And say, this is not real either. My family situation growing up was unreal. And this is unreal in a different way. And I have to be honest with myself. And I do think that my image of what family should look like was whiteness, right? That is what was taught to me by television, or what was taught to me um, about what it means to be good people, what it means to be happy. It was all of that kind of ideal. That is white supremacy. Um, so yeah, I do agree that family can be and often is a pillar of white supremacy. Um, and the judgments on all of the families, who don't fit that norm is detrimental to people's health, their life, their well-being, how much money they make, what opportunities they have. So yeah, family can kill.
When I wrote the book on being a gay parent, I have a background in being trained in family therapy and marriage counseling from my work with kids with disabilities at Devereux Hospital, and met some great family therapists, and did a lot of reading on family systems and what have you with Ed Friedman stuff. He was the hot guru in the Presbyterian Church when I was doing some work in Montreat. There was Janet Fisher, Rodney Clapp, and a few others who wrote about the unbiblical biblical family. And what they did in their writings, and I picked it up and put it in on being a gay parent, is they talked about how the biblical families that we have, both in Hebrew scriptures as well as the New Testament scriptures, Christian scriptures, are so unlike anything that our families represent today. And to go back to the what I call the tyrannical American family, I mean, you have Abraham, Sarah, et cetera. You had Gideon. You had, Joseph and Mary. Joseph is stepdad, if you will. You had families living on top of each other, because the structure of family in Palestine in that time was everyone lived on top of each other. If you're nomads, you're all out there. It was Middle East culture time. And so that's the biblical family. That's what's written in Hebrew scripture. That's that kind of family. The American family of the nuclear family of the 1950s to the 1970s, which is the rage, was 1940s, 50s. It was picked up from the quote nuclear language that was verbalized during that time of this tight knit community, atomic unit. That was anathema. That was unknown in biblical times. So that's why when I find a lot of so-called evangelicals picking on, family, quote unquote, family values, I always want to go, do you understand what was going on in those biblical families? Because it was more of a real potpourri, because it was a matter of struggle, survival. The codes of hospitality were so different than what we do today. And so when people kept on pulling back in recent times to the again conservative and so-called quote unquote evangelical family values, those weren't known, and those were but the most recent construction of being family. Family has always been under evolution. There's always been an evolution of our understanding of what it means to be family, and queering the family is but one of the latest ways that we can talk about and be family with one another. It's organic. It has to be organic. It's human. Therefore, trying to put any kind of hold on it and say it's got to be this one way and one way only. No, we have to communicate. Yes, communication is core to any relationship, but in terms of making one kind of family the norm, that again goes back to tyranny. That again goes to idolatry. And God knows John Calvin would not be proud of our worshiping any kind of idol. Can't believe I went to Calvin with that one, could you?
Yeah. That was not. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to. I mean Calvin and Hobbes, of course.
Yes, of course.
Whenever I think of the ways that this like very prototypical white family is like the dominant image that we as Americans have in our head, I think about how that is suffocating to queerness, but I also think about how that's suffocating to Blackness.
Yes.
And how so much about just being a Black person, or really any kind of person or person of color in America, just goes against that system, because our family structures by default are so incredibly different, and because white supremacy has created these systems that require our families to be different, because they in ways have shaped and formed them in ways that go against their own norms, and then we get punished for going against the norms that they're forcing us to go against anyway. And it's just one giant cluster, whatever. I was almost the one to swear on this.
Yep.
And I think it works very similarly with queerness, where like there's no limitations on this, right? Like there's not a limitation on love. God doesn't put it on there. We don't necessarily have to do that. There's no limitation on community. God doesn't put that there. We don't have to put that there. But then like whiteness is all about like boundaries and limits, and like not healthy ones either. Ones that are like just there to be very restrictive and sort of suck the life out of everything, to be domineering and controlling, which is just abusive. And that gets applied to literally everything, including families. And so you get this very rigid structure that says that everything else is outside of it, that anything that is not very puritanical, everything that is not this 2-parent, 2-kid, dog, cat, whatever, is outside of it. And it's so incredibly limiting, and it's so incredibly small that there's more folks on the outside than on the inside. But then they're telling all the rest of us on the outside that we're wrong.
Right.
And so like the rest of us are just sort of living in this like outside open air prison to this idea of family that doesn't even really exist or matter. So why, when we could all just be free and be in community and love like God calls us to?
Amen.
Yeah, and if it does exist within that structure, there's always something that is a part of this idol of what a family is that is affecting that family. Because like there is the very unhealthy relationships and very abusive relationships can one of the reasons why we do this show is because of that the very small group of people who have formed and tried to fit this kind of white supremacist mold have also had the biggest amplification and has had the biggest influence about certain things within our society. And we wanted to start this because we wanted to offer something where people of faith can offer something different to that, to say like what you just said, Ashley, love does not have a limit. And I think where I'm going with that is like, what more can the church do? Because the church is also perpetuating this. And now, as people of faith in this space, we're going against that. But this is small. Like this part of what being a person of faith is small, and I think is growing. But I do see the other side of it speaking louder, having more and more radical voices in public spaces that are continuing to build. And my fear is that we have moved into a time where there's a different administration and people are going to relax and say they're just the more radical ones. But people are listening. And what can the church do to really say like, no, that's not what this is. That's not what the church is. And so where is the space that the church can be more speaking like we're speaking right now? I wonder.
Well, one of the important things that we need to do is be the public face more and more. Having programs like this one is really very helpful in that regard. But we need to see in our leadership more queer people. It's not enough to have allies in these leadership positions, although that is great that we do. But we need to see more queer people in leadership. We need to challenge pastor nominating committees who want that norm of the mother, the father, and the two kids in their pastors. We have to push back at that and push back hard, and tell our stories more, I believe. And that it's not, we're not the odd ones, right? We're not even small in number. But if we let the powers that be tell the story, we're small in number. I mean, if you look at our colleagues at the Presbyterian Center, Lee, as far as I know, we are small in number, and we need to question why that is. We're not sitting at all the tables, and we need to question why that is. So it's all about challenge, to my mind. It's all about challenge and revolution.
I think the other thing that needs to start, I agree totally with everything that's been said. And to go back to what Valerie said as well, I think that our leaders and us as leaders need to keep on pushing the church to engage for us with the queer community. For example, yesterday, May 17th, was Transphobia, Homophobia, and Biphobia Day. There wasn't a thing within the Presbyterian Church, let alone any other denomination that was talking about that. The rights of
There was one Twitter post.
Right. The rights of transgender people in this country, and what we went through in the prior administration, the health concerns, the place in military service, all of that, we need to respond and be equally aware of and engage, the church does, with what's going on in terms of the larger queer community, if you will. For example, one of the things that's becoming more commonplace among some of my friends are throupled relationships. Now, our book of order that was amended said 2 adults, right? But more and more clergy in other denominations are in throupled relationships, healthy throupled relationships. I have heard no discussion within the context of the church of anyone dealing with what does it mean when we have a throupled committed relationship between three individuals who are of consenting age and have chosen to go this way because they feel called, they feel love. To go back to what Ashley was saying, love is love. Love is of God. Let us love one another. So I think that we as a church, and I also want to go back to what Valerie was saying, in terms of the call installed process, you can still discriminate against us in the Presbyterian Church USA. We are still not able to serve in certain presbyteries as LGBTQI people like Orlando and things like that because of what was written 10 years ago. So we have some cleanup that we have to do even in our denomination in terms of our presence, let alone being sure to what Valerie said, that we are at the table and that our presence is at the table. The next meeting I have to go to today is the Committee on Representation. As I go off after my 6 years, there will be no LGBTQ person representing on the Committee on Representation in the Presbytery of the Cascades. I am the only out gay Presbyterian pastor in the state of Oregon. There's one lesbian, one out lesbian, and one out gay man. So I think we have some work to do in terms of representing, in terms of, as Valerie said, being at the table, being in the pulpit. I have more great joy, talk about queering the pulpit. I have more great joy showing up and saying, I'm a gay man. And they go, I really learned something today. I go, of course you did. I put some prep time into this. So again, we're not only queering the family, but we're queering the pulpit, we're queering the session, we're queering the deacons, we're queering fellowship. And we need to engage with what's going on. The church, Presbyterian Church USA, needs to engage with the LGBTQ, with the queer community, because there are things going on there in which we are absent. We are, it's not a matter of, and our absence is silence, and our silence therefore means that we agree with it.
Brett, I love everything that you just said. Valerie, I love everything that you said. The two things that I will add to that, because, such a word. One, language matters. Like, even the most, like, I've been to so many churches that talk about how welcoming and affirming they are, and they're still using gay and lesbian. Like, no, most binaries do not exist. Like, we can add, the acronym is longer, and Google is free. We can learn what these words mean.
Right.
And we can acknowledge that we don't know what some of these things mean, and we can teach ourselves, and we can fix it when we mess up and apologize. And like it's not a one and done. It like, things are going to keep evolving. We can keep learning. It's fine. Like, it's going to be okay. I promise you. Like, the world kept evolving. Like, if Jesus resurrected, like, if Jesus can die and do a whole resurrection, you can learn some new letters. Like, it'll be fine. The other thing, and like I said, I have spent most of my life doing children, youth, and family ministry. And the number one question that we get asked, that any like youth leader, any children, youth, and family pastor will get asked, is what do we do as a church to bring in children and or young families?
Right.
And I want to bury this question into the ground. I hate it so much. First of all, because you don't want the answer.
Right.
You don't want the real answer, because it requires like radical change. It requires you looking deep into yourself, and it needs to be done at the systems that you have and that you value and the things that you hold on to deeply, and asking yourself, who is this keeping out? Who is not being valued in the current systems that we have? And if we claim to want people to come in, what about this system has to change or be destroyed? Right. And the other thing is, who is already here? Why are we lifting up certain people as families and putting them on pedestals? You have family in the church. People come to church every Sunday and they talk about brothers and sisters and siblings. That's your family. They're there. They're there and they're straight. They're there and they're queer. They're there and they're 4. They're there and they're 90. Like, they're there. They're there and they're single. They're there and they're coupled. They're there and they're polyamorous. Like, they're already there. And so I think the church needs to learn to celebrate the people for who they are, not who you want them to be. Not who you think is valuable, but just finding the inherent worth and dignity in every single being exactly as they are, exactly in their age, exactly in their gender identity, exactly in their sexual orientation, exactly in their relational status, exactly as they are. And if we can do that, if we can use that to show them the love that we are supposed to have, if we can use that and do that through actions in the way that Brett is talking about, if we can use that and use that to move us in the way that Valerie is talking about, then maybe we can actually get somewhere.
Amen.
Yep. And queer the ordination process.
Yeah.
Child, don't even get me started.
Yeah. That's a big thing too. Yeah.
You know, for people who have discomfort, that is not our problem. If you have discomfort with LGBTQIA plus folk, then find yourself a therapist and do the work. It's not up to us to get out of the way to make you feel better. You need to do the work and repent.
One of my experiences as the LGBTQIA plus advocacy coordinator was we had an all queer youth group camp down in California with an all queer staff. And one of the things that everyone said and agreed with is, this is the first place I haven't felt I had to be an advocate for 24 hours. I haven't felt I had to teach anyone for 24 hours. And everyone could kind of exhale because of the way, because we are called to be in those places, in those congregations, in that center in Louisville. we do advocacy and teaching 24/7, and so sometimes just by our presence, and I got that, but it is this is where we need a break at times, and just need to just to be us. And that was the beauty of this camp for 3 days, was everyone got to be themselves without having to worry about teaching someone or advocating or being sure, are you uncomfortable? No, right. Those questions just never came up, and it was just beautiful.
Yeah, I got to witness that. We were there for something different, but they had a camp there for queer kids, and I imagined myself there. For one, I imagined myself there and was like, my God, if I had something like that growing up, how different my life would be, for one, but also just to see how like free they looked. Like there was nobody there to like say anything to them. Like, you can't wear this. Like, schools can be the most homophobic, transphobic, queerphobic places there is. But in this space, they all kind of went to school together. And I think there was a prom or something after. And seeing that, I was like, that is what this needs to be. Like, they were each other's family. They were them full selves. They didn't have to, like, and some of these kids, like, their parents knew they were going to a camp, but didn't know it was a queer camp. But they felt safe, and they felt like they could be them true selves. And so, yeah, I think that is the most closest picture I've seen to the kingdom of God that I think I've seen in a while, is that. And it's young people. And I'm glad Ashley mentioned that to the church, to say, we are tired of you saying that you want to see young people in the church and not backing it up and not doing the work and not putting, I am considered young in the church, y'all, and I'm 33, and not putting young people in leadership and younger than 33. I'm talking about youth and young people who are going through a lot right now, and they need to be there. But before we close, I know Brett has to get to another meeting, but I do want to give just like a 1-minute response in closing to people out there, maybe who need a little something from their queer family. I feel like we're all family. So what would you say to queer folk out there who are maybe having a hard time, that need a little something out there? Just a 1-minute little response. Valerie, what would you say?
I would say you too are a beloved child of God, and you deserve more than you are receiving. And it breaks my heart that you're not, but there is a place for you, and we're here. And especially to the 12-year-old, 2 12-year-olds who I know just recently came out to their families, and their families were there for them. And I say, bravo. I'm so grateful for their witness. So you're not alone.
And Brett?
This is, we are on the cusp of Pentecost. And we all know what happened on Pentecost. Forget about the fire. Love the fire, but no, forget about the fire. It was the wind. It was a stirring. And that spirit is still stirring. And let's not forget that. This is about us. We are the disciples. This is about us. The spirit is stirring. And I always look outside of the church sometimes to find out exactly where it is, because sometimes God just goes outside and just does it. And so there is a stirring in the church, in the world, that is affirming the lives of LGBTQIA plus queer people. And it is amazing.
Ashley?
My dear beloveds, I know what they say about you. They say it about me too. But it's not true. Because the scripture says, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are queerfully and wonderfully made. You are made in the image of God, and no one can deny that. No one can take that away from you. And so whatever it is that you do, I know that it hurts, but please remember that God loves you so very much. So do I. So do all of us. And we are here waiting for you whenever you need.
Amen.
Amen. Well, with that concludes this episode. And thank y'all so much for being with
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
To being on the show. Next week, we'll be here, same time, same place. We'll have Susanna Larry here with us, who wrote a book about the Bible and domestic violence. And so we are going to be talking about that. And then for June, every episode of Just Talk Live is going to be a queer episode. So we're going to celebrate Pride Month with our queer siblings every episode. So check that out. Destiny will be back next week. So until then, we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.